response video to a video by Matt, 0ThouArtThat0. Mind and Nature, in German Idealism. It's a lecture series for, I guess, a course that's part of his whatever project that he must accomplish to gain his authorization, his qualification as the knower of the things. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, kind of, yeah. I guess it's nice to have indexed or, rummaged through all of this philosophy talk by the Germans, the Kantian types and whatnot. And, maybe there's a few lines in there that might mean something to people. The I think, therefore I am, or type blah, blah, blah. And this whole idea of transcending something. But this isn't really getting to the nature of what we know, what we have learned, especially over the last 100, 150, 200 years. The game has widened. The view of human psychology and the role it plays in defining philosophy is now understood much better. We understand the Earth was the center of the universe because in the original religions and all the rest of it, it's because people have an ego reason to create it that way. And they tell stories that aggrandize. They're chronically not completely honest. And that's just the truth of history, and it's the truth of storytelling, and it's the truth of the manipulations that take place because people have agendas created by their psychology, not their philosophy. Yes, they have to have a philosophical gap that allows their psychology to run their voice box, what they will do to other people, what corruptions they will allow them to be navigating the world by, what fallacies and falsehoods they will help spread across the world because they think something, because there's an angle. There's always an angle. You'll always, it's not just follow the money, it's follow the ego, follow the statues, follow the titles. And all of this is toxic to doing this truth-seeking thing. So he uses lots of, depth of insight there, revealing, and the special significance. They're lovers of wisdom. They're pursuing knowledge and freedom. Knowledge and freedom. Freedom? Yeah, freedom from what? Freedom from the truth. And they're not pursuing the truth. They're pursuing knowledge of a scheme to live by. Some sort of fundament, an operating system, that keeps them busy. Keeps them busy making more of the same mush. Keep the mush engine running. So anyway, all this stuff takes place before Darwin, and that's really the point, I suppose. The counter-argument I would make is that the philosophy before Darwin and after Darwin is going to have to change. There's going to be the realization that we are of this earth, and that we're of it in the flatworm sense, that we are evolved out of the animals that humans tended to degrade and dismiss. That is us in our more primitive, but nonetheless in our substantive state. Their psychology is our psychology. What they lack is our intellectual capacity to understand that psychology. So, Darwin and then Freud opened a lot of those doors, made the world visible, and we don't have excuses for closing them and ignoring what we can see, because we're too busy doing the ivory tower thing. And, the German philosophers were pretty much ivory tower elitists, and, they didn't live in a real world. So anyway, he talks about, metaphysics, this alienation from nature, going through the idea of the sun being the center of the solar system, and this being the radical change, when again the real radical change is the acknowledgement that not only are we not the center of the universe, we're pretty much just a parasite on the surface of a insignificant planet, and we're doing not much more, not anything more, than any other organism eking for its comfort. And we're attempting to still aggrandize the story, because we are discomforted, quite simply, by a story that isn't magnificent and grand. So to realize that we go through our angst and our discomfort and our miseries and our pains and our losses and whatnot for something less than a grand purpose is not psychologically acceptable to people, but it is the philosophical truth. So again, the I think, therefore I am, I doubt, therefore I am. So we're going to keep living with Spinoza's vision of the universe and the value of the natural process. So it's just another way of, once they accept some greater connection to nature, and nature bred us, built us, they have to turn that into some kind of mother, some sort of Gaia egg, some sort of flower bursting with, love, or some other kind of mush, and not recognize the fundamental nature of it, which is consumption and reproduction, combined with, addiction and parasitism. Crap. That's what it's made out of. It's the mechanism is crappy. It's processing the world in the literal sense, and doing it for no other reason than you're built to be a processor. Pac-manning for the sake of Pac-manning. Just do your Borgish best to be what the animal, let the animal run the organism, rather than rationally recognize that you're playing a game for real stakes, and it matters how much you waste. It matters how much you grind up for your ego, your sense of importance, the sense of your society or your nation state or your race or your religion or whatever you have that you are devoted to. That devotion will come at your compromising reality and your compromising value to placate your desire to be more than you are, your wish to make the facts suitable by shaving them and arranging them and distorting them clearly, distorting their context to create a delusion that says you're great, and because you don't want to hear that you're a worm, that you're a consuming machine that isn't built to be efficient, that there's more friction than function. Yeah, more friction than function. So, the hard problem came up in this first lecture, the idea that consciousness needs some explanation, that it is the proof of some necessary purpose or purpose giver, some bestower of the consciousness, some cause that goes beyond function, because they would imply the argument that somehow, without feeling, we could still have that function, that we could still have intelligence and the capacity to reason and the capacity to learn. And I would argue that you could not. You have to have something that synthesizes the idea of correct and incorrect. And it has to be, that idea has to be separate from the engine that's processing. It has to be separate from the agenda engine. It has to be separate from the engine that figures out how to score the goal. They can't have intimate knowledge of each other, in the sense that you can't create purpose that way. The purpose has to be veiled and mysterious, or your goal maker won't function. And so through this process of needing some way to establish good behavior, bad behavior, reward behavior conducive to survival, the brain came up with this mechanism of sensation to reward and punish, to create the carrot and the whip, to create the conditioning, the capacity to recognize the difference between a correct answer and an incorrect answer, to feel the significance of the difference. You couldn't know that it matters that you get the right answer if you didn't have something that whipped you. And mathematics, nothing would work, because it would mean nothing to have an equal sign and a wrong answer after it. It means something to have the correct answer because of this reward system. And yes, of course, there could be other ways the biology could have manifested this, instead of creating all this angst and emotion and pain. But this is the way it fell upon to make it work. This is the way it evolved into working. And so we're stuck with the gear work. We're stuck with the 5 fingers. Could have been 6, could have been 4. We're stuck with, enameled teeth instead of metal teeth. I mean, the body could have been different than it is. But this is the way it evolved, and the way we evolved a value-creating agenda engine is through sensation, pleasure and pain, more specifically pain and pleasure. I would argue that the sensation of pleasure is more the sensation of a day without whips, consciousness undisturbed by negative contemplation, worry, angst, visceral, biological disturbance, a lack of calm, is the mechanism created to keep us on our toes, to keep us in the game, to keep us prepared to fight or flight. So there is no hard problem in understanding why we are sentient. We can see it in all the other mammals. We can see why they feel, and why their feelings are powerful. It's because their behavior needs to be reinforced. They can't be programmed like an ant to be something. They need to be emotionally persuaded to be something through a hierarchy. We can see the power of the socialization of the earning of king and queen status rather than the bestowing of that status. It's a different kind of mechanism, and requires the existence of a different kind of motivator, of agenda engine. So, in closing, I would say what these philosophers lacked was an understanding of this distinction between the mind that models the world, that conceptualizes, that takes things and looks at them and defines their properties, finds water and describes it, finds mountain and describes it, establishes its density, its thickness, its durability, different aspects of its existence. And once properties have been defined, then those things can be put into categories of likeness. And that's the function of our intellect. And through the process of establishing a list of properties and establishing the categories and what fits into those categories, we build a knowledge base. We define the associations. We define the context of our existence. We build the truth, a model of the truth of our existence. And that mechanism is very different from this agenda mechanism of sensation and emotion and wish and want and resentment and envy and hope and all the other mush, the emotional mush, that is a projection of the biology, a projection of the crude animal trying to force us to be one of it, to go back to being, to using the brain just to scheme, to navigate a way around the crocodiles and the lions and the other pests and nuisances of existence. We can now use that modeling engine through language and education to understand the dynamic of our mechanism. And the dynamic is fundamentally, a fundamental realization is to just realize that there's two parts to us: the agenda, the driver of the individual, and the contemplator, the thing that can see the game. And part of what it can see in the game are categorical labels like good and bad. It can see value, it can see vulnerable, it can see concepts even like fairness, efficiency, and function. And as long as it doesn't imply a purpose that doesn't exist, as long as it doesn't see itself as the center of the universe and recognizes what's really at stake, which is the sentient sensations, the experience of existence, as long as it is not diluted by allowing its own psychology to pervert the model, it can fully understand the right thing to do, the most efficient way to deal with existence in a world that does contain what appears to be much more whip than carrot, and cannot justify itself as efficient without radical correction to that imbalance, to that inefficiency, to that failure to function, failure to have more function than friction. So that's the necessary correction, and it's discernible and accessible. We can access that knowledge by just looking at evolution and looking at the faculties that are its byproduct, and recognizing that some of those faculties have integrity as telescopes and microscopes. They make the world visible, and some of them are perversions of rose-colored glasses. They're perversions of false and fake values and hopes that are just toxic to the truth. They're distortions, pollutions, created by the biological mechanism that resists a narrative that doesn't maintain aggressive play by the individual, because that's what we're built to be, and we have the knowledge to be. That's the thing we need to transcend, is psychology, is the foolish passions of a organism driven by passion. Or something like that. So anyway, that would be my counter argument to lecture 1. And I suppose I should do a lecture style video someday. Just going through these basic concepts I've just illustrated. There's only, what, 5, 10 of them that are important to understand. Evolution, the dynamic, the fact that there is something called a psychology and something called a philosophy, that one's built out of rigorously tested knowledge, and one is built out of visceral, crude, ancient and archaic motivational mechanisms, and they have no value as knowledge. Knowledge of them has value, but they produce no value knowledge. And the rest of it's just a denial of the silly alternative theories of God, intelligent design, external purpose, transcendable circumstance. This circumstance doesn't have anywhere to go. There's no gift we can give a universe that doesn't need. We create need. We don't resolve need. That's probably number 5. We don't solve a problem. We make problems. 6. So anyway, till the next time. Yeah, I really am uncomfortable. The psychology is ripping.